Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Thanks for joining us. Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you on the X-Zone TV channel, divisions of Relmar McConnell Media Company with studios and corporate offices in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. This hour will explore the mysterious power of emotions. Emotions. We all have them, but what are they? What purpose do they serve? How do they impact our lives? With us this hour to examine the role and influence of emotions is Reneau Peurifoy. Reneau holds a master's degree in counseling and was in private practice for 20 years, specializing in anxiety disorders. He left private practice to teach at a local college in Sacramento, California. Reneau is the author of 5 books. His most recent is Why You Feel the Way You Do. His website, whyemotions.com. Reneau, thank you so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Oh, it's good to be here.
It should be a wonderful day. We're going to be very emotional about it, right?
Well, I don't know about that. That's one of the things you work with this stuff for a lot of years. A little bit of it sinks in. So
we hope, right?
yeah.
So let's start out by defining emotions. I mean, it's a common term, but do any of us really know what they are? How would
Well,
you define them?
when you look at neuroscientists, they call them affects, or they talk about affects, and we actually have 3 levels. And at the most basic, and maybe let me define affects first. It's something that compels you to do something. Okay, so the most
Ah,
basic affects are sensory affects, so heat, cold, pressure. If I'm sitting in this position too long, I get compelled to change my position. If I get really cold, I'm compelled to find something that's warm. And so the next level up is what they call the homeostatic affects, and homeostasis is just a fancy word for balance. And so things that keep balance in your body. So hunger and thirst are the 2 big ones. If I'm haven't drunken any water for a long time, I get really thirsty and I get compelled, I want to drink something. So what we normally call emotions are kind of like the next level up, and there are 7 of them, and they get connected in with the thinking part of our brain, and they get modified as we grow up with our experiences, the things that we come to believe, and they again basically are compelling us to take care of needs within us. In fact, one of the ways to think of emotions is they're just messages about needs that you need to take care of, either good things you need to go seek or things you need to avoid. And in that sense, they're just part of that mechanism we have for survival.
well, when you listed those, I couldn't help but notice that it seems like the place we would be jammed the most, or our natural compulsions would be interfered with the most, would be the emotional realm, because
Right.
we see a toddler throwing a tantrum, and everybody around him has an opinion on how that should be managed, right?
Yeah. Just as a side note, I remember when my son first threw his first tantrum, I was reading a paper. And so I looked down and said, wow, this is just like what the books describe. And so I watched it for a moment. I went back to my paper, and he quit, got up quietly, walked, found where my wife was, threw himself down, did it all over again. But again, it's a form of communication, right? That for
Right.
toddlers have. But but maybe again, going back to some of the roles of emotions, they serve a lot of purposes. And one of the really neat things about the brain is the way it does so many things that we're totally unconscious of. As you start to grow and develop, in fact, even it starts in the womb, your brain starts making associations between good things and bad things. And it gets those things absorbed so that they can function on an unconscious level. As I walk down the street, my brain is not only coordinating my muscles and my body, but it's also watching out for anything that's been associated with danger, a car, a dog or whatever. And it'll bring those things up to my conscious mind as soon as it notices them, while I'm busy thinking about what I'm going to have for lunch, or where I'm going, or listening to some music or something of that nature.
Well,
And of course, the problem is when normal, safe things get identified as bad.
Well, also, it sounds like over time, if you have experiences that are not pleasant, you
Right.
associate them with particular stimuli, then
Exactly.
don't we kind of get cluttered with all these things that trigger us unnecessarily?
Well, I don't know if clutter's the right word. It depends on your background, but for some people, it certainly is. Certainly, that's true because emotions are the way your mind uses to index information. So that's how it sorts what's important and not so important. So as things happen to you, it if they're important, either positive or negative, it puts an emotional tag on it. That's why experiential learning is more valuable than just book learning. I can read everything there is about driving a car, and I can really understand intellectually how to drive a car. But until I get behind the wheel and start actually doing it, that's when brain starts to say, "Oh, wait, that didn't work. That's going pretty good." And now I can take all that information and sort it so that it now becomes something that it can work on an automatic level. While again, now I can just listen to the radio or talk to somebody or think about where I'm going, things of that nature. And that's really the neat thing about the brain is the way it can handle so many things on that automatic level, so we don't have to deal with it. And again, as you said, sometimes we get, especially if you grow up in like a negative background or a post-traumatic stress disorder where somebody's had a bad accident, been in a war zone or something like that, and sights and sounds that are normally safe now have been tagged with danger. A person, for example, in a car accident, all of the sights, sounds, all the sensory stuff going on at that moment now get imprinted as danger, which is why when they get in the car again or they're in a similar situation, anxiety comes up because the brain is saying there's something dangerous going to happen.
So it sounds like this could get problematic
Well, yeah.
if we're responding to situations as being dangerous and experiencing the emotion of fear or whatever comes up, when indeed it's just an echo of a memory and the current situation is
Mm.
not problematic. Is there a way we can get in there and rewire that mess?
Well, it is, and again, we use the computer terms a lot, rewiring, reprogramming, and the brain is not a computer. We are organic beings, and memories, changing them is kind of like building a muscle, right? And you can quiet these these patterns. We call it desensitization, and get them where they don't normally fire, but they will occasionally fire when you're sick, kind of retired, or under stress. And that's an important point. In fact, that's a lot of what I did with anxiety related problems in my practice is work with how do you teach people to quiet and desensitize to these things. And a lot of it has to do with whether we're dealing with a simple trigger, such as a person's been in a plane that's got hit by lightning and now they're anxious about getting on a plane, as opposed to somebody where it's been years and years of childhood abuse or spousal abuse or something of that nature, or they've spent a prolonged period of time in a society that's where there's a lot of upheaval, all kinds of crazy things going on around you. Uh, those types of things, usually there are multiple triggers, and so you have to kind of work with them one at a time as they quiet down.
So what do you mean by quieting down? Are we changing neurological pathways? What are we doing there?
Well, you're desensitizing. If I like chocolate cake and I eat chocolate cake, the first bite is really good, but if I keep eating it, pretty soon I get dull to it, right? So you kind of dull yourself to that sensation. That's maybe the simplest way of thinking of desensitization. So, like if I'm working, I'm thinking of a lady I worked with who had a fear of water, and when she was young, her brothers told her that there were piranhas in the pool and they're going to eat her toes, and you know, siblings give therapists a lot of work as people get older. Uh, and so, the thing is the conscious mind shuts off when she's around water, and that danger signal comes up, and oh my gosh, I can't be near it. I got to get away. And so you have to kind of slow things down and reconnect that conscious mind thinking, along with some tools to relax and deal with the anxiety. So you teach people relaxation response techniques. You work with the self-talk. In her case, we used a simple "what's happening, what's real" technique. What's happening is I'm responding to an old fear from when my brothers told me things that weren't true. There never were piranhas. I was always safe. I'm safe now. And so using the self-talk to help calm yourself, along with tools like breathing, relaxation response, and then just sitting next to the pool till you get used to that. then sitting on the side of the pool with the feet in the pool, and eventually getting to where you can be comfortable in the water. And actually, over a period of about a month and a half, she was able to desensitize and get into the pool and no longer have that trigger. Once in a blue moon, something would trigger her. She'd get a little anxious. And like I said, usually that's when you're sick, hungry, tired, or some kind of stress is going on. And that's when you're most vulnerable to those old patterns to reemerge because the conscious mind is not functioning as well as it normally does.
So your tools are a little slower to come online when you're exhausted.
Well, yeah, and that's an important point because when we talk about stress management, a lot of people have this crazy idea that I can always function at 100%, make myself do whatever I need to do. And again, it's part of our culture. I think we see it in the movies. We see the guy get thrown out of the airplane, stabbed, beat up, run over by a truck, and he's still moving along. And a lot of people think, yeah, I can do that mind over matter, that kung fu thing. And no, your body is a machine with a limited supply of energy. And when you're sick, hungry, tired, again, the conscious part of your brain is not working as well. And so a lot of those emotional triggers tend to be on just more on a hair trigger, if you will. That's why you misbehave more when you're sick and retired, right?
Yeah, I get grumpy.
Yeah.
Go in a hole somewhere. We're just about out of time in this segment, but does it behoove us to actually push our envelope? In other words, some of these stimuli we're not going to run into on a in a normal situation. Is it good to expose ourselves to places where it might trigger us so that we can start desensitizing?
Well, the rule of thumb is if it's interfering with your life, then you probably need to deal with it. I would never bungee cord jump, right? Uh, so don't need to do that. So I just don't do it, right? So if it's not interfering with your life, it's not a big deal, then don't worry about it.
That's a really good rule of thumb because you can spend the
Mm.
rest of your life trying to desensitize all the trauma, right?
Right. Or just things that are normal things that, people are afraid of.
There's some, and I'd like to talk to it on the other side of the break that we're just about to go into, but there's
Mhm.
some fears that seem to be almost inbred into the psyche of the masses. In other words,
Yeah.
we haven't personally had a problem, but there's a fear there. So I'd like to get into those on the other side of this station
Mhm.
break. Renault and I will return shortly, so don't you go away. This is
Mhm.
Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
Mhm.
Emotions are so messy. Why do we have them in the first place?
Mhm.
With us discussing the purpose of emotions is the author of Why You Feel the Way You Do, Reneau Peurifoy.
Mhm.
Renaud, we were just about to go into an interesting thing, and that's the universal fears that
Right.
all people seem to have, like, people, children or whatever, that have never seen a snake. They see a snake and it's not a good thing. Okay, so explain those to us.
Well, and that's not necessarily true, and there's a lot of debate about that. Uh, there was an interesting study that's actually going on back in the early 70s. A town in New Zealand, Dunedin, they started studying every baby born over the course of a year, and studying. They're doing all kinds of medical tests, psychological, psychosocial, studies. And as genetic stuff came up, they started working with that. And it's still been going on. So this group of people, a little over 1,000, have been studied for over 50 years now. And one of the things they found early on is that the children fell into five basic groups. And you had your kind of what they called well adjusted children, which was 40 some odd percent. And, they did fine with people, social situations. Then you had what they called their courageous group. Those are the ones that as adults would do hang gliding and, all the crazy stuff. And, those two groups did fine as long as they had, decent family backgrounds. Then you had a group that was the reserve group, and they're a little bit shy, a little bit slower to warm up to people and situations. But again, if they were in a normal background, they did fine. And the two groups that had problems were the extremely shy kids, and that was a small percentage, and then the small group of kids that were under controlled. In fact, they found that being able to control yourself was one of the best predictors of success in adulthood. And this would be the children who, with a marshmallow test, where you give them one marshmallow and you say, if you wait 5 minutes, we'll give you another one. They just immediately gobble it up. They have no impulse control. And so this gets into, you talk about that reserve and shy group. they're going to be more afraid of spiders and snakes and stuff like that. Your courageous kids, they're going to go out there, they're going to play with it. It's just going to be something interesting. In fact, an interesting study done with monkeys, they had mothers, monkeys, who were born in the wild and so had a fear of snakes. And then they had babies who were born in captivity, so they'd never seen a snake. So they'd give the baby monkeys a rubber snake, and the baby monkeys just had a lot of fun with it. Would run over, show it to mom. Of course, mom would freak out, and that would immediately cause the baby now to start freaking out. So that vicarious conditioning that we get, it's hard to separate that out from what actually is uh, a genetic or an inborn. We do have a natural disgust for certain types of odors and things. Uh, but again, it's that vicarious conditioning. Children are so sensitive to their parents and the adults around them and read them just like your cat or dog does. Our ability to understand and read that nonverbal communication is amazing. And with children, it's especially acute because they're still developing language. As we become adults, we start depending more on language, although we still have that ability to read people, which is why we get vibes off of people. Uh, just a simple example of that, I can say the simple phrase, I love you. I love you. I love you. Hey, love you, gal. You know, you understand what each of those mean without my explaining them, because again, that's an inborn wiring thing that we've developed over time, being able to read people. Um, so, getting down to, are there some universal fears? Again, there's a lot of controversy over that. I tend to fall in the school that says, it's a learned behavior. Uh, as we grow up and just learn from the people around us what's dangerous and not dangerous, and a lot of that's done before we actually even have memories of when we learned it.
So it sounds to me like that
Mm.
if it is indeed like you say a learned behavior from when we're very sensitive as children, that means that the more the adults desensitize themselves to their triggers, the less of that they
Oh yeah,
pass on.
yeah. Yeah, when I had people with panic disorder or the problems, they would often say, "So, how do I keep my children from developing this problem?" And the answer is always the same: you learn how to overcome it yourself, and you model that.
Mhm.
You see this on TV all the time. There's a tragedy, and where does TV go? It goes to the person who's freaking out and shoves that mic in front of their face. I remember when my son shipped off to the Middle East. Uh, there were 100 guys there, and there was like one family where the lady was hysterical. Where was the newspaper media? It was right
Right there. Exactly.
there.
We sure focus on that.
Yeah, and you see that in different cultures. Different people really do have a lot of different response to things depending upon partly their personality. Again, you have those different personality types. Some are going to be more reactive than others, and some are going to be more bold and courageous. But then also the influence of childhood and your family and culture. Cultural,
Right.
different cultures. Uh, had a missionary I remember who worked in New Zealand. He was talking about how they'd go into the wild country, and they'd get served these grubs and things for food. And of course, if you're the guest, you get the biggest, juiciest one. And he had a hard time with it. He says, but his kids had no problem with it because they had been raised that way, right?
Exactly.
So,
So there's another interesting topic I'd like to look into. Um, do humans have, you mentioned emotional systems that we have in common with our pets and other
mhm.
animals. Would you go into that a little bit? I find that fascinating.
Well, the affective is just a fancy word for emotional. The affective neuroscientists, they've at least by the Panksepian ones, feel that they've identified 7 core emotional circuits inside of us. The 3 that we're most familiar with, of course, are lust, anger, and fear for danger. But 2 that a lot of times we aren't aware of. One is something called seeking. And if you look at any baby, um, they're out there exploring their environment. This is true whether it's a human baby, a puppy, a cat, a wolf, or whatever. And so there's this desire to go out and explore the environment. Are there good things out there? Are there dangers? In fact, it's the basis of our curiosity. It's why when you are in a room and somebody enters, everybody looks to see who that is or what's going on. And it's just an unconscious compulsion, and it's part of that emotional system to just identify what's around us. You go to the doctor's office or a new situation, and again, the first thing you do is just kind of casually check everything out. I mean, it's not like, it's not like fear or anger, but it is an emotional drive that we want to know what's going on. And again, drives a lot of our curiosity as an
So
adult.
it would be like situational awareness.
Yeah, but it's more of a compulsion to want to do that as opposed to, and again, you can either enhance or dampen that depending upon your training. And another one is play. In fact, Pansep, it's interesting. He had these rats, and he could totally shut off the thinking parts of the brains, and the rats still wanted to play. It's how social animals learn limits. If you've ever worked with a young child, you play with them, and at some point they go too far, and so you say, "Hey, too far." Uh, you can see this in the pictures of the little baby gorilla poking the old silverback. At some point in time, he looks back, he says, "Okay, enough, right?" But we still want to play, and it's still part of how we interact and we connect as adults. So play again, if unless it's been dampened because of our early childhood experiences, it's something that's again connects us. Uh, it turns out there's actually two fear circuits. One is danger, but there's another one they call panic. We know it more as separation anxiety in children. So when the baby is separated from uh, their parent, then it goes into distress. And that triggers another circuit inside of us, which is called the caring circuit. And so those two kind of are what bond us together. It's why we miss people as adults and why we want to take care of them when something's going on with them that's distressing them. Uh, and those all basically make up our emotional system. And again, four of those have to do with relationship, right?
So how about guilt and shame? It seems like a lot of that is perpetrated on our society. Are
Yeah.
those natural emotions or are those something else?
Oh, they're learned because people have guilt and shame over different things, and some cultures are more guilt based and some are not. Uh, Guilt is basically I've done something I shouldn't have, right? And so I'm sad because I did it. I could be angry at myself because I did it. So the two underlying emotions again are sadness or anger, depending upon how I look at myself and what I did. But basically, I've done something I'm not supposed to do. So I've broken a rule, either societal rule or a personal rule. And so now I'm angry with myself or I'm sad because I did it. And that's, we label it guilt, but that's really the underlying emotions. Shame is more something has been done to me that has damaged me in some way. You see this, for example, in sexual abuse. I've been tainted in some way. Somehow I'm no longer measuring up. I'm no longer worthy. And so it's more usually a form of sadness, if you will. But again, it's this kind of recognizing that I can never be like everybody else because then somehow I've done something that I'm not supposed to, or something's been done to me rather that I'm not supposed to. And again, some cultures are very shame oriented and honor. Others are more legalistic in terms of right and wrong. I mean, Western culture tends to be more, rule. At least what it used to be, more rule oriented.
So you're saying they're learned emotions rather than ones that we come with.
They're,
Is
they're, they're what we call secondary emotions. Again, that they emerge as we develop belief systems about ourselves and the world and people around us. And then, so these primary emotions, if you will, then they get filtered through that belief system because as you grow up, you have a model of reality. Who am I? How do I fit into the world? What should I expect from society? What are the rules for living? And then that's when we break or we succeed in those, fulfilling our role in those different areas.
and animals experience this as well, yes?
Well, we really don't know. You see these videos of the dog that stuff that they're wrong,
Mhm. Yeah,
and
their
it's
ears are all twisted and they squint
yeah.
their eyes. Yeah.
Whether
Uh-huh.
that's shame or guilt or just fear that the parent that the owner is going to catch it, it's hard to we don't know.
Well, animals are pretty fascinating and I think we're learning more and more about how they're emotional beings just like we are.
Well, and that's interesting because of the latter part of the last century, animals were just thought of by a lot of people, researchers, as just these little conditioned response patterns, and things, and they really didn't have emotions. In fact, doctors used to think young children, like when they did circumcision and things like that, they didn't have really emotions
Didn't
like
feel
adults.
pain and they didn't have emotions.
Yeah,
Oh,
which now we realize that that's all stupid stuff. It's
hmm,
yeah,
yeah,
they have emotions just like us. They have
just
the
like we
same
do.
basic seven, core emotional systems, and so that gets filtered again through their behavior, which I think is an
Well,
important thing to say. Uh,
it is again that time for a station break.
okay,
Renault and I will be right back to continue
okay.
our discussion, so stay right here. This is Mission Evolution,
Mm,
www.missionevolution.org.
mm,
This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. So, how do you really feel? We're delving into our feelings with Reneau Peurifoy. Renault, we talked a little bit about how triggers cause us to go into an emotional state that may or may not apply to the current time, and
mm,
that those triggers and the emotions can control us.
mm.
Okay. And about some of the things we can do about that. And we'll go into that a little deeper later. But what about people that have judged against emotions and shut them down altogether? What's the cost of that?
Well, and again, people are not all the same. We don't all have the same musical ability, math ability, or athletic ability, and so brains do get wired a little bit differently, and they also get influenced by early childhood experiences. The saddest example would be babies that came from Eastern Europe orphanages where they were never touched or held. They were
Mhm.
just, bottles were propped up. And so when they cried, nobody would come and comfort them. And so when they got adopted, they had a hard time attaching to the parents. An interesting experiment was done measuring oxytocin, which is one of the hormones that's connected with the caring system. And when birth parents and their child would watch a simple, play a little simple game on a computer, the oxytocin levels would just go up really high. Whereas with these babies, it would stay flat, indicating there was something going on with that emotional circuit that wasn't working right. It had been suppressed so long that it was no longer activating. And again, with proper treatment, that can be resolved to some degree. So early childhood experiences, while we don't know too much because this is still a very new area of research, do seem to affect these emotional circuits. The other thing is people have different wiring. People that are sociopaths, some of their wiring in the brain, the way the frontal lobes connect in with the basal ganglia and some of the other areas of the brain are different from your quote normal people.
So, would you mind backing up a little? And for those of us that don't know, what's a
Yeah.
sociopath? What do we
Oh,
mean?
those are people that basically they don't feel guilt when they do bad things to other people. They don't have a lot of emotional connection with people. Uh, find a lot of them in politics as CEOs. And again, actually it's a fairly high percentage of the population that that has some degree of that. And if they come from a fairly normal, healthy background, they can still integrate in society, do well. There's a person that was doing research with sociopaths in prison, and he was doing brain scans and stuff. He said, "Well, just for fun, I think I'm going to take a look at my own." And he found, hey, mine looks just like theirs.
That would be a frightening moment, wouldn't
Well,
it?
he went into his background. He found he had all these serial killers, including Lizzie Borden, the famous axe murderer, were all part of his ancestry.
Oh
But
my
he,
gosh.
but he'd been adopted into a family that really wanted him, and he was really loved. And so he says, "Well, that's probably what cushioned me, because he had a normal. He was married, had kids." He says, "I do like to win. I do like to rattle a chain sometimes with people, but he was living doing fine."
So from what you're saying though, it sounds like there was a genetic predisposition to being a sociopath
Yes,
rather than environmental.
well,
And that's
and
what
yeah,
was reading?
yeah, we have these things. It's always chicken and the egg. It's both environment and your genetics. For example, there's a gene for shyness, and you can look at human babies, or they've done these with primate studies too. And there's a short form and a long form, and people with a short form, they tend to be more shy and reserved. With the monkeys, if you take a baby like this and pair it with a nurturing mother, then they come out and do fine. Sometimes they can be the leader of the pack. If you pair them with a a mom who is not very nurturing, then they become even more shy. So these genetic predispositions, they either get amplified or quieted depending upon your family of origin. So it's
So,
not guaranteed you're going to go that route.
so it sounds to me like it's going to become increasingly useful to really be able to read genetic material so that we can nip it in the bud, if so to speak. How far
Yeah.
along that path are we? Do you know?
Oh, we still got a long. There's a lot more that we don't know than we do
It's
know.
quite a
We're
mystery.
just on the beginning. Although a lot of us, just look around your family, you can kind of figure it out.
It's right there.
when,
Okay, so
when I was doing parenting classes, people would have this kid that was really rambunctious and stuff, or maybe oppositional, and so I'd say, okay, so which one of you were like that?
exactly. So there's we've alluded to this a little bit, but I'd like to really bring it up front. When you walk into a room, okay, and the people that were in it before you were there was emotional charge going on,
Right.
but they're gone, and there's a lot of people that'll walk into that room and go, something doesn't feel good here. What's going on there, and can we read the frequency, or what are we reading there when there's nobody there to read off of?
I nobody knows, to be quite frankly. And again, a lot of people, the sensitivity of people is different. I worked with people with anxiety disorders, and as a group, they were a much more reactive and sensitive group than
Mhm.
the normal person. In fact, I used to say it's kind of like a house where the wiring's not quite up to code. You put too much stuff in, the circuit breakers go off. These people, when they had too much stuff going on in their life, then they would have the anxiety would come up. And again, the positive side of that, it was one of their best attributes because they empathized well. It's a thing about them that their mate, their kids, their friends really liked because they were great listeners. It's just they had to be careful with that sensitivity and recognize that, they're in a world of insensitive clods who are not like me.
Mhm.
And that was once they learn that lesson, there are times when you have to shut down and times you have to just, when you're getting overloaded, back off and take care of yourself. The whole psychic phenomena thing, though, um, that's a real controversial area, and I don't know.
So, kind of on that same token, do
Mhm.
we resonate with emotions? So, say for instance, the mob mentality. What's
Yeah.
going on there?
Well, yes, certainly you have the whole mass hysteria, the mob thing. And again, part of it comes off of just that being able to read other people and empathize with them. Part of it just has to do with mob psychology, not wanting to go against the mob. All the experiments where they've done where they have a classroom of people and they put two lines up on the board and one is clearly longer than the other, but everybody is going to select the short line except for the test subject. And a lot of times they'll go ahead and they'll select the wrong one just because they don't want to go against everybody else. So we do get caught up with that need for bonding. And I think it gets back to the fact that we're social animals. We have all these emotional circuits that are geared towards binding us with other people, and it's part of our strength. But again, in a lynch mob or something like that, it's a negative part of it as well.
Well, that would also kind of explain cult mentality, wouldn't it?
Well, cult mentality, you have people that are vulnerable for a variety of reasons, and then you have a charismatic leader who is able to capitalize on that. Basically, a con artist. And some people are easier to con than others. And those who don't have a strong belief system and cultural background, they're much easier to be led astray by somebody who's very, very charismatic, gives them the answers, paints the way, and okay, follow me. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and do that.
So the in both of those cases, the mob mentality and the cult mentality, it seems like there's again a resonance. So it actually distorts reality for these people, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, but I mean, that happens to us all the time anyway. We're always filtering reality through our belief systems, and we never see it as it is. And again, some people are just more vulnerable because they do more, for example, emotional reasoning. I know with anxiety related problems, that was one of the things that you had to train people to not do, is to use logic to evaluate as opposed to my emotions. I mean, you see this like with gambling, right?
Mhm.
I feel like I'm going to win, even though the odds are,
Way off.
50-1 against me, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
So when you got the mob mentality or the cult
mm.
mentality, is it running off of triggers, emotional triggers?
Well, it can be, but I think again, it has more to do with people who have a background where they're more vulnerable to being led. Again, they have a uh, personality that's not a little bit more dependent upon approval and other people. A lot of times you have people who are searching for meaning. They're kind of lost, and you have this charismatic feature or correct charismatic person who now gives them the answers and leads the way and gives them a belief system that makes sense out of the world, even though it
Again,
may,
it sounds
may, 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 maybe even if it's a crazy world, right?
sounds a bit like politics too, but we won't go there, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, you get the same thing. People in politics, they're always trying to con people into do emotional reasoning as opposed to logical reasoning. I mean, look at all the TV
Advertising,
ads. Yeah, the ads. Well, yeah,
advertising, yeah.
sex and fear are the two things that underlie all advertising, right?
Right,
Uh, Either some
right.
kind of fear of something or some kind of sexual connection with people. And if you get those two things fired up and associated with your product, then you're going to sell a lot of product.
Oh, and then there's the fear of not being sexy, right? So
Yeah,
we
yeah.
we get
Well,
both of it going there.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Exactly. Um, what are you speak of habitual thinking patterns? What are those?
The most common one is something we call should must thinking. And again, understand that it's important to have rules in life, and sometimes we become very rigid about those rules. I have to be on time, and if I'm just super super rigid about that, if I'm get caught into a situation where I'm going to be late, then I go kind of nuts, right? And I start driving crazy. I start yelling at people and things. Uh, as opposed to accepting the fact that I'm going to be late and what can I do about it. And I should
So
also say that sometimes you grow up in a society or a situation where it's important to have rigid rules. If I'm in a chaotic society or if I'm in an abusive household, then I need to be very rigid about I never say this or I never do this or I never do that. And I used to joke about I had really good depression era parents, right? So my mom had a lot of should must rules, and where she grew up and in her time frame, it was important to have a lot of those because they were survival based. You see this with people who come from again cultures that are very abusive. They come into our country and they don't exercise a lot of the freedom that they could exercise because they're still living as if that's the society they're living in.
right, and
Part
then
of
projecting that onto others as well, right?
And so part of growing up is again coming to take a look at your rules and reassess them and make them your own.
All
If
right.
you
Well,
have if
it's time
Okay, well, let's
for.
pick it up. This one's a good one to pick up on.
Okay, hold that thought.
Yeah.
Please stay with us as Renaud
Mhm.
and I continue to explore the power of emotions. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Reneau Peurifoy. Renaud, we had a nice thread we were starting. Would you hook us back into it and take it away?
Well, and talking about should must thinking, life is a series of choices. You make choices based upon either I'm going to get some good stuff or I'm going to avoid some bad stuff. When you have these should must rules, it's as if this parent is following you around telling you you have to do something and I don't want to do it. So it's like when I was teaching, I tell the students, you don't have to come to school, just stay home and relax. Well, but if I don't, then I'm not going to pass, and then this is going to happen, that's going to happen. Okay, so you're choosing to come to school, okay, because you got some benefits you want. It's not that I have to go to school; it's that I'm choosing to go to school. So if I'm thinking in terms of I have to do this, I have to do that, again, it's like I have no power. My power is
It's
outside of me.
very much a victim stance,
So
isn't
when you
it?
start to take a look at,
Mhm.
no, I'm choosing to do this for this reason, whatever it happens to be, now I'm in control. And so that's one of the things that I found. Again, a lot of my anxiety clients had a lot of should, must rules, things that they should and have to be. And so I say, well, okay, I want you to take a look at those rules and decide which ones do you want to keep. Do you want to modify them? I had one lady, for example, that you had to have 12 cookies on the cookie sheet when you baked. Couldn't have 13, couldn't have 11, had to be 12. You know, I would that there's that rigidity, right? And again, that came from again her family background and partly her personality as well.
So
And so,
this is like OCD, right?
well, yeah, it wasn't quite OCD, but it's
Getting there.
or yeah, I mean, all of our psychological disorders are simply normal things that are exaggerated. You know, like we all get depressed, but then if it's interfering with our life, then we call it clinical depression, right? Uh, so yeah, so learning that there's nothing I have to do in life. Everything is a series of choices, and so I need to make some choices and be in charge of that, as opposed to this outward things
S-
person ruling me.
So does that give you a way to interrupt the squirrel wheel that we tend to get on, where we go into anxiety and we just react rather than be reactive rather than proactive?
Well,
Is that
again, shouldless thinking is one of the sources of anxiety. I mean, there's
mhm.
a lot of things that cause us to be angry, anxious. Um, Let me just digress for just a moment, because there is a hidden form of should miss thinking that is super, super common, and that's something called circular why questioning. And I would see this all the time with clients. I don't understand why that happened. I don't understand how that could happen. Why would that person do that? And so I would say, so why do you think it would happen? They would give me a perfectly good explanation, but then go right back into, but I don't understand why. Because what's really underlying it is the person should have done this, or things should have happened this way. They didn't. It violates my belief system about the way the world should be. And so whenever I notice somebody going into that circular why question, and you can do this yourself, if you find yourself saying, I don't understand why, stop for a moment and say, okay, why do I think that happened? Probably you can figure it out. But again, it's some aspect of reality that you're having a hard time accepting. Again, I used to say I'm just a positive realist. You know, sometimes life is not the way we want it to be, and sometimes it's really rotten, but it's what we got to deal with. So I've got to accept that this is just the way it is. What, how am I going to respond to it, as opposed to I don't understand, why isn't it the way I want it to be?
So if we're very emotionally attached to what we think should
Mhm.
happen in life,
Mhm.
are we more vulnerable to this?
Well, sure. You're going to have a lot more anxiety and anger around those areas of life where things are not the way they should be. And again, you alluded to politics, and you see this in politics a lot too. People capitalize on those should must rules that people have. Um, and I think, to become fully conscious and to actually start to think of life as a series of choices, and to be in the driver's seat as opposed to having outside forces controlling me, is part of what makes you just happier in general in life and more successful.
Yeah, being able to be in control and
Right.
proactive gives you an avenue for expression
Mhm.
that you otherwise don't have.
Yeah, and moving back to that whole topic of emotions, one of the things we didn't touch upon is the fact that we all have core response patterns that we develop.
Yes, that was next.
Some of them are good, and some of them interfere with life. And so, what do I mean by core response pattern? It has to do with our rules, again, for how I'm supposed to behave, the way the world should be. So, for a negative one would be somebody growing up in an environment where there's a lot of abuse, let's say physical abuse. And so they might get the core response pattern that conflict is dangerous if they're one of those courageous Evil Knievel kids, and they're going to fight back, right? And they're going to learn that that's the way you solve things, right? But let's take the child who learns that I stay safe by keeping my mouth shut and avoiding conflict. So that becomes a response pattern that's mostly unconscious, right? As there may be some belief systems and some conscious thinking around that, but a lot of it's just an unconscious automatic behavior pattern. Now they come in and they see me in therapy, and they say, I don't understand why I just find it so difficult to speak up at work, or I'm out at the restaurant and I want to order something. My friend says I shouldn't, so I don't. And I would like to speak up, and later on I think about it, but I don't. It's because they have this response pattern that developed when they were young. And I like to put a label on it. Conflict is dangerous, because I find if you put a label on these different response patterns, uh, it gives you a tool for now working with them. Doesn't change it, but now I can recognize it. So the process that I would use is, first of all, we put a label on it. Then we come up with a simple explanation for why it's there. The reason for the explanation is to get you out of the circular why questioning. I don't understand why I didn't speak up. Well, it's because you have conflict is dangerous as a core response pattern that developed when I was young because that's the way I stayed safe. Okay, now let's focus on what to do about it. We've gotten out of the circular why questioning. So let's identify some specific places where that response pattern comes up. Well, I don't speak up when I'm with friends. I don't speak up at work. I tend to be passive around my mate. Okay, so what are some opposite positive behaviors I can start to practice? Again, it's just like desensitizing to a simple fear of water or something of that nature. You have to learn to desensitize uh, to get comfortable with asserting yourself, because really we're talking about assertive actions in this case. So you come up with some simple situations and you start practicing the opposite positive. And you also come up with a number of things you can tell yourself to encourage you to use that behavior. I have the right to say what I want. I have the right to speak up. I have the right to make some choices. Uh, and you put some of those things on a card, you read them for a week to get them drilled in your head. And that helps to motivate you to start practicing the simple behaviors. And over time, you find you can actually start to change those patterns. You'll probably never be the same as one of those courageous kids, but it's okay. You can get to the point where you can speak up and function, normally in life.
Really nice. So, Renaud, it's that time in the show when I get to ask you, what is your mission?
My mission is to make people's lives a little bit better. I mean, I've always been a teacher. I've always liked helping, and so my mission is to make the world a little bit better by just helping people manage their emotions and their lives more effectively.
That's a very good mission.
Mhm.
I'm glad you're doing it. So,
Yeah.
one of the things that we haven't talked about, and I like to close on a positive note,
Mhm.
is happiness. What's involved in finding happiness?
Well, three key things. The first one, far and beyond all the others, is relationship. Having some deep, meaningful relationships. And in our modern world, we're moving around and we're plugged into our electronic devices and stuff. That's one of the things that a lot of people don't have. It's interesting when you go to developing countries. A lot of times people have a lot more hardship than we have, but they have rich relationships. They have extended family. They have a lot of times a lot of people around them that they've known for most of their life. And so even though they have a lot of hardship, that seems to buffet them in ways that when you don't have it, because again, we are social beings. We have all these emotional circuits designed for intimacy and connection with other people. If you have two or maybe three people that you can be totally transparent with, and you don't have to worry about being judged, you're going to do pretty good in life.
You're pretty rich then, aren't you?
Unfortunately, many people in our culture don't even have one. They have 500 Facebook friends, but they don't have anybody they can really be real with. And of course, then you get that fear of missing out because everybody else has a better life than I have. Or people are so bought into this idea that life is about entertainment and stimulation. And so I'm getting things, I'm being stimulated. I constantly got TV or something going on in my ear or something happening. And that's how I get happy. And it doesn't. It gives you temporary distraction, temporary thrill. But what really gives you that deep sense of satisfaction and peace is connection with other people. And that's something I really encourage people to seek. Um, you see it in our younger generation where they're so tied into their electronics and social media. It's one of the reasons why anxiety and anger has increased in our culture.
And it's bursting out in all sorts of different
Yeah,
ways. It's sad that we're such a rich culture, and yet probably one of the most miserable in a lot of ways.
materially rich, relationally poor. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So hopefully we're just about out of time. But
Mm.
how would you say to turn that around?
Well, you seek it. You can seek it through like a church. You can seek it through social organizations, people who have an interest. Like if I like to bike, I can get into a biking group. There's all kinds of different things, and this is maybe the positive side of social media. You can find a lot of times people have common interest, but then find ways to connect with them face to face, because again, we are organic beings. And while, like, when my daughter was in England, we would Zoom and meet with her, and that was nice, but it's not the same as going and having lunch with her.
Giving her a hug.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, again, we're just about out of time. Do you find that people, once they're starting to find core relationships, they're having to work through a lot of the triggers, relationship triggers?
Well, yeah, we're all messy little beings, and we all have a certain amount of baggage that we bring into the real world. And again, we bring in strengths too. It's not all negative. I mean, some of these core
Absolutely.
I mean, we talked about conflicts as dangerous. The opposite of positive would be I can manage conflict. I
There
have
we go.
tools.
Well, it is that time.
Hmm.
Renaud, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. So thank you for inviting
Real
me.
pleasure. Our guest this hour has been Renaud Peurifoy. Renaud holds a master's degree in counseling and is the author of 5 books, his most recent, Why You Feel the Way You Do. To find out more about Renaud, where you can find his books and all he has to offer, visit his website, whyemotions.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But most importantly, be sure to join us right here next time as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to our evolving world.